Okay, today I want to talk about two concepts, which are performative authenticity and reflexive authenticity. Um, Today, in our culture, in our digital age, authenticity is held up as a universal ideal. So, be yourself is not merely an encouragement, it's an imperative. It is presented as a corrective to the pressures of conformity culture, of capitalism, and yet paradoxically, this call often produces its own form of conformity, a performative authenticity. And this performative authenticity emerges when individuals, consciously or subconsciously, calibrate their behavior to project this image of authenticity rather than expressing something that is intrinsically true to them. And this phenomenon is particularly visible in digital culture and social media environments where being real becomes this curated performance of external validation rather than an internal alignment with one's values or feelings. And it sets a template for how other people relate to themselves and express themselves. So let's kind of define where this came from historically. So I want to look at where this concept of authenticity as performance really started bubbling up in our culture specifically, and where this concept was born in a way that fits into our digital culture. So there's a philosopher, Lionel Trilling. He has a book called Sincerity and Authenticity, 1972. Traces the cultural evolution of authenticity as a moral ideal. And Trilling distinguishes between sincerity, which is alignment between external behavior and internal state, and authenticity, which is a deeper notion involving the discovery and the expression of a true self, free from societal influence. So, Trilling warns that authenticity, once that authenticity is valorized, can itself become performative. And when authenticity becomes a social expectation, then individuals inevitably begin signaling it intentionally. They start dressing it up as spontaneity and emotional rawness or vulnerability to meet perceived expectations or to hook into an expressive genre of self-expression. So the behavior that results is not genuine spontaneity, but strategic signaling, templated articulation, creating a new kind of conformity disguised as individual expression. So, what is the psychological cost of performative authenticity? Well, I think that the cost is something like self alienation, actually. So, ironically, what ends up happening is in the pursuit of giving expression to ourselves through a cultural template, we actually bury the kind of authenticity that would actually give true expression to something internal to us. So, performative authenticity has this significant psychological consequence. So, there is the philosopher and psychologist Erich Fromm in his work Escape from Freedom, 1941. He identifies how societal pressures can encourage people to abandon genuine self knowledge and abandon their genuine autonomy in favor of predictable social roles. And in the context of performative authenticity, the social role being performed is ironically that of an authentic individual. So, this performance can lead to a kind of self alienation where the actor becomes disconnected from genuine self awareness instead of navigating life according to an external social criterion of authenticity. And so, paradoxically, the pursuit of authentic expression can lead to a deeper estrangement from the self. So, if performative authenticity produces self alienation, why does it persist in our culture? Why do you have selfies and videos of people crying that are clearly performative, right? And this persistence of performative authenticity lies in its social rewards, and that's kind of obvious, right? As social beings, people respond powerfully to validation and approval and status. And so when authenticity as a performance garners applause and likes or engagement, then individuals learn to replicate these behaviors. And over time, authenticity becomes less about inner alignment and more about recognizable scripts and signals designed for consumption. So this is exacerbated by algorithmically driven platforms which explicitly reward certain performative behaviors. And authenticity, under the conditions of our digitally framed lives, is optimized, and it's A/B tested, and it's refined for audience resonance and watch time and click through rate, further divorcing authenticity as a genre of being from genuine internal coherence as a mode of being. So, how do we recover genuine expression? So, maybe it's better to even think of it as not recovering it, but recovering from performative authenticity. And recovering from performative authenticity requires distinguishing between that externally driven authenticity and that internally driven sincerity. It involves that reorientation from social feedback towards intrinsic motivation and internal coherence, going back to Lionel Trilling's concept in Sincerity and Authenticity. So, um, practically, this means periodically removing oneself from environments that are driven heavily by external validation and reducing over curation of self presentation and relearning the quiet internal language of sincerity. The ability to act from genuine feeling and conviction rather than external expectation. It also involves embracing subtlety and complexity and inconsistency, recognizing that genuine self expression rarely aligns neatly with the implied images favored by digital platforms. I would argue that real authenticity also is transgressive in some way. Like if every version of your authentic self perfectly conforms to the digitally and algorithmically optimized forms of self-expression, it's probably a false self. And so if there's nothing transgressive about if you don't want to say anything transgressive or culturally sinful in some way, then I think that I would be skeptical about how authentic that version of your authenticity really is. Real authenticity often involves moments that feel vulnerable and awkward or uncertain and uncomfortable, and maybe something that's going to get me in trouble. Precisely those least likely to be rewarded socially. So, I want to kind of juxtapose this concept of performative authenticity with this so far we've been calling it sincerity, but I want so far we've been comparing or contrasting performative authenticity with sincerity. I want to juxtapose performative authenticity with reflexive authenticity. So performative, how do we define these concepts? So I would say that performative authenticity involves externally displaying behaviors or traits that align with socially recognized signals of authenticity. It's a protocol. It relies heavily on visible actions and appearance to gain validation, often driven by social expectations and immediate approval. And then reflexive authenticity, as articulated by sociologist Anthony Giddens in his book Modernity and Self-Identity, 1991, emphasizes internal coherence and continual self-examination. It integrates external feedback thoughtfully rather than adopting it wholesale. Reflexive authenticity is maintained through self-awareness and reflection and adaptive evolution. So let's dig a little deeper into the differences between performative and reflexive authenticity. Let's look at sources of validation. In performative authenticity, sources of validation primarily comes from external approval, often determined by social media reactions and community responses or cultural standards, or really just how your friends think, or even maybe just the facial expressions of the person in front of you. Whereas reflexive authenticity Validation arises internally through self-assessment and coherence with deeply held personal values, adjusted but not dictated by external input. But what about behavioral consistency? Well, performative authenticity has actions and expressions that change significantly depending on the audience or social setting, that really emphasize context specific behavior over internal consistency. Whereas reflexive authenticity has actions that maintain continuity across different contexts due to internal alignment, adapting thoughtfully rather than reactively. What about self-awareness and depth? Well, for performative, you have often superficial levels of authenticity as individuals may prioritize immediate impression management over deeper self-exploration, right? So performative authenticity is about impression management. Reflexive authenticity is deeply rooted in ongoing introspection, involving continual questioning and refining of one's motives and beliefs and behaviors. What about the psychological impact? Well, performative authenticity can lead to emotional exhaustion and anxiety and eventual alienation from one's true values and feelings due to a constant demand to maintain an appealing external persona, which can lead to um, a soft practiced dissociation. And then a reflexive authenticity, in terms of the psychological impact, typically supports a long-term psychological health by fostering self-understanding and resilience and intrinsic self-worth through prioritizing integration of the modes of being that I have to inhabit each day in different contexts. So it's not that I can't be different people in different contexts, but rather that these are integrated with some core set of values or point of view or subjective frame. And then finally, how do these concepts of performative and reflexive differ on the level of adaptability to social change? Well, for the performative, it's vulnerable to rapid shifts in social standards and can cause sudden crisis of identity when external validation standards change, right? So that's why, like, 1 month you have somebody doing like one form of performative authenticity on social media, right, where you may be leaning more heavily into a particular, maybe wanting to identify or capture yourself within a specific victimhood narrative, and then the next, it's more about another victimhood narrative, right? And you're looking always to kind of identify how your life belongs in a specific bucket that deserves a kind of empathy or attention, right? Whereas reflexive authenticity is adaptable, but it's stable and it's capable of incorporating societal changes without sacrificing core identity due to its reflective and internally consistent nature. So, kind of to summarize all of this, while performative authenticity emphasizes external approval through visible and often very superficial alignment with social expectations, reflexive authenticity fosters a resilient and internally coherent identity through ongoing self-examination and measured adaptability. So, so how do we tie all this together? And what does this mean for us? Well, authenticity, properly understood, is not a performance. It's a condition of internal alignment. And performative authenticity, by contrast, is a trap, offering temporary social rewards at the expense of genuine self-knowledge and autonomy. And navigating this trap requires recognizing when authenticity has become performative, recentering intrinsic self-awareness over external signaling, and cultivating the internal discipline of sincerity and reflexive authenticity. Only then can authenticity move beyond performance into something truly expressive of personal identity and agency.